Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're heading to Ireland, specifically a town on the southern coast called Cobh. You ever hear of it?
Oh, yeah. Cobb's got a special place in my heart. It's
Real?
one of those towns that's just packed with charm and history.
Yeah, I was doing some reading about it, and I gotta say, I'm intrigued. I mean, we're talking about stunning architecture, a connection to the Titanic, and there's even this street nicknamed Deck of Cards. Apparently the houses look like they're gonna slide right down the hill.
Oh, you're talking about West View. Yeah, that's a sight to behold. It really does look like a deck of cards. All these colorful houses stacked up the hill.
So is that what first drew you to Cobh, the colorful houses?
Well, it's definitely one of the things that makes Cobb visually striking. But honestly, it's the history that really gets me. This little town has played a major role in some pretty significant events.
Okay, so spill the tea. What kind of history are we talking about?
Well, for starters, Cobb sits right in Cork Harbor, which is one of the largest natural harbors in the world.
So it's got a prime location.
Yeah.
Exactly. And over the centuries, that's made it a strategic port for trade, for military purposes, and even for immigration.
Ah, so that's where the Titanic connection comes in, right?
You got it. Cobh was the Titanic's last port of call before it set sail for America.
I mean, that's got to be a heavy thing to carry, knowing that so many people boarded that ship right there. And then,
It's definitely a poignant part of Cobb's history, but it's also a reminder of the town's role in Irish emigration.
so it wasn't just the Titanic. Cobb was a major point of departure for all sorts of immigrants.
Absolutely. For centuries, people were leaving Ireland from Cobh, seeking new opportunities in America, Australia, all over the world.
You know, it's funny. When I think of Irish immigration, I usually picture Ellis Island. But I guess Cobb was the starting point for so many of those journeys.
It was the last glimpse of home for countless Irish men, women, and children.
Wow. That's got to be an emotional thought.
It is. And you can really feel that weight of history when you're in Cobh.
So we've got this picture of Cobb as a bustling port, with ships coming and going, and immigrants bidding farewell to their homeland. But I'm curious about the town itself. What's it like to actually walk those streets?
Well, Cobh is actually a pretty small town, but it's packed with character.
Like, what kind of character?
You've got these narrow, winding streets lined with colorful houses and shops, and then you have these grand Victorian buildings, like
Yeah.
St. Colman's Cathedral, which towers over the town.
Wait, you mentioned St. Colman's earlier.
Right. It overlooks that Deck of Cards street, West View.
So it's like this grand cathedral watching over this quirky little street.
Exactly. It's one of those scenes that just screams Cobh.
You're making me want to book a flight right now. But before I do, I gotta ask, what makes Cobb unique? What sets it apart from other Irish towns?
Well, I think it's that blend of history and charm. You've got these layers upon layers of history, from the ancient Celts to the Vikings to the British Empire, and it's all visible in the architecture, in the museums, even in the pubs.
So it's like stepping back in time.
In a way, yes. But it's not a stuffy museum town. There's a real vibrancy to Cobh, a sense of community and pride.
You know, that's something I've noticed in a lot of Irish towns, that strong sense of community.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the things that makes Ireland so special.
So we've got stunning scenery, fascinating history, and welcoming people. What more could you ask for?
Well, I'd say you can't forget about the food and drink. Cobh has some amazing pubs and restaurants.
Okay, now you're talking my language.
So you'll find everything from traditional Irish fare to fresh seafood to modern twists on classic dishes.
So it's not just about Guinness and potatoes.
No way, although you can definitely find those too if that's your thing.
I mean, you can't go to Ireland without having at least one pint of Guinness.
That's the rule.
Okay, so far we've covered a lot of ground. From gravity-defying streets to tales of emigration to grand cathedrals.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
I was going to say there's got to be more to Cobb than what we've talked about.
Well, there's plenty more. But before we dive deeper, I want you to think about this. What part of Cobb's history speaks to you the most? What resonates with you on a personal level? Hold on to that thought as we continue our exploration.
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm already thinking about it. But for now, let's keep going. There's so much more to discover about this fascinating town. So we've been talking about all this history, but what about the town itself? What's it like to actually be there? Like, what's the vibe?
Well, it's not like you're walking through a history book. It's not frozen in time or anything. But you can definitely feel the history all around you.
Okay, so it's not a living museum. It's more like a place where the past and present kind of coexist.
Exactly. It's a living, breathing town with modern shops and cafes and all that. But the history is always there, kind of lurking beneath the surface.
You know, I'm picturing those cobblestone streets And those colorful houses we talked about.
Yeah, those are a must-see, especially Westview, that deck-a-card street.
So are there other parts of Cobh that are like that, visually appealing? I mean,
Oh, tons. The whole town is pretty picturesque. I mean, you're right on the harbor, with these rolling hills and colorful houses.
okay, now you're making me jealous. I'm stuck here in the studio, and you're describing this idyllic Irish town.
Well, hey, maybe this deep dive will inspire you to take a trip.
Maybe you're right. But speaking of inspiration, I gotta ask about the food. You mentioned earlier that Cobh has a good food scene.
Oh, it's fantastic. You've got your classic Irish pubs with hearty stews and fresh seafood chowder.
Okay, I'm already drooling.
But there's also a lot of newer places. Trendy cafes with artisanal coffee, and restaurants that are really focused on local ingredients.
So it's not just about the traditional stuff.
Nope, Cobb's got a really diverse culinary scene these days.
Okay, so we've got stunning scenery, fascinating history, delicious food. What else is there to do in Cobh?
Well, if you're into outdoor activities, there are some beautiful coastal walks with amazing views of the harbor.
And I bet the air is so fresh there.
Oh yeah, you can practically taste the salt in the air.
Okay, now I'm really getting FOMO.
But you know what else is cool? You can take boat trips out on the harbor, or even hop on a ferry over to Spike Island.
Ooh, Spike Island.
Yeah, the one that was a prison.
Oh, right, the one with all those layers of history.
Exactly. It's a short ferry ride from Cobh.
You know what I'm loving about Cobh? It's like you can choose your own adventure. You can dive into the history, or indulge in the food, or just soak up the natural beauty.
That's a great way to put it. Cobh really does offer something for everyone.
Okay, so we've talked about the sights, and the sounds, and the tastes of Cobh. But what about the people? What are the locals like?
Well, everyone I've ever met from Cobh has been incredibly friendly and welcoming.
That's kind of what I've heard about the Irish in general.
Oh yeah, the Irish are known for their hospitality.
So you think I'd feel comfortable just striking up a conversation with someone in a pub?
Oh, absolutely.
Uh.
I'm sure you'd end up chatting for hours.
You know, when I first heard of Cobh, I kind of assumed it was this hidden gem off the beaten path.
Mm-hmm.
But from what you're describing, it sounds like it's pretty well known.
It's definitely not a secret. But it's not overrun with tourists either. It's kind of like the perfect balance.
I like that. Accessible, but not overcrowded. Still retaining its authentic charm.
Exactly.
You know, you asked us earlier to think about what aspect of Cobb's history resonated with us the most. For me, it's the stories of emigration. Hearing about those journeys, the challenges they face, the hopes they carried with them.
Yeah, those stories are powerful.
It really makes you appreciate the sacrifices people made to build a new life for themselves.
I think that's something that resonates with a lot of people,
Hmm.
especially those of us who have ancestors who emigrated from Ireland.
It's like a connection to our past.
Exactly.
Well, what about you? What aspect of Cobb's history speaks to you the most?
Well, it's hard to choose just one, but I think what really fascinates me is the way Cobh embodies both triumph and tragedy.
What do you mean by that?
Well, on the one hand, you have the grandeur of St. Colman's Cathedral and the natural beauty of the harbor. It's a place that exudes hope and resilience.
Okay, yeah, I see that.
But then you also have the somber history of emigration.
Yeah.
And the shadow of the Titanic. It's like a microcosm of the human experience, reflecting both the light and the darkness.
Wow, that's a really good point. It's not just all sunshine and rainbows. There's depth and complexity to Cobb's story.
Exactly.
And I think that's what makes it so fascinating.
I agree.
Okay, well, after hearing all of this, I gotta say, Cobh is officially on my travel bucket
I
list.
knew you'd come around.
But now I have another question. For those of us who are planning a trip to Cobh, do you have any advice on how to make the most of our time there?
Oh, I've got plenty of tips. But the most important one is don't try to cram everything into a day trip.
Oh, so it's not a place you can just check off your list.
Nope. Cobh deserves more than that. You need to give yourself time to really soak it all in.
So take it slow.
Exactly.
Right.
Wander the streets, linger in a cafe, chat with the locals.
I like that. Embrace the slow travel movement.
It's the best way to experience Cobh.
Okay. Any other tips?
My other big piece of advice is talk to the locals. Strike up a conversation in a pub, ask up their favorite spots. You might even hear some local legends or ghost stories.
Ooh, ghost stories. You had me at ghost stories.
They're a big part of Irish folklore.
So it's like getting those insider tips.
Exactly.
Experiencing Cobh through the eyes of the people who know it best.
And you know what they say in Ireland? Seed mile fealty.
What does that mean?
100,000 welcomes.
Oh, that's lovely.
I have a feeling Cobh will welcome you with open arms.
Huh, I'm sold. I'm booking my flight as soon as we're done recording.
You won't regret it.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. As we wrap up this deep dive into Cobh, what's the one takeaway you want our listener to remember? Okay, so we've heard about the history and the architecture and the food and even the people. What would you say sums up Cobb's appeal? What makes it so special?
Hmm, that's a tough one. It's like trying to put your finger on the magic of a place.
Yeah, like how do you capture the essence of a town in just a few words?
Right, but if I had to try, I'd say it's the power of place.
The power of...
Yeah, Cobb isn't just a collection of sights and stories, it's an
I
experience.
like that.
You don't just visit Cobb, you feel it.
So it's like the history isn't just something you read about in a book. It's something you can feel on the cobblestone streets, in the salty air blowing in from the harbor.
Exactly. You can sense the weight of the past in the very air you breathe.
Wow, that's pretty powerful.
And I think that's why Cobb resonates so deeply with people. It's a place that touches your heart and soul.
I'm convinced anyone listening who hasn't already added Cobb to their travel list is doing so right now. But for those of us who are planning a trip, do you have any advice on how to make the most of our time there?
My biggest tip is to slow down. Don't try to cram everything into a day trip.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier. Embracing the slow travel movement.
Exactly. Give yourself time to wander the streets, soak up the atmosphere, let Cobb reveal itself to you at its own pace.
So don't rush it.
Nope. Linger in a cafe, strike up a conversation with a local, just breathe it all in.
Okay, I love that.
And speaking of locals, that's my other big piece of advice.
Talk to the locals.
Yeah, they're the keepers of Cobb's history and culture.
Ah, how do we do that?
Just be open to it. Pop into a pub, ask about their favorite spots. You might even hear some local legends or ghost stories.
Ghost stories.
Yeah,
I'm always up for a good ghost story.
you're in luck. Ireland is full of them.
So it's like getting those insider tips, experiencing Cobb through the eyes of the people who know it best.
Exactly. It's like unlocking a secret level of the town.
I love that analogy.
And you know what they say in Ireland? Seed mile filte.
100,000 welcomes.
That's right. I have a feeling Cobb will welcome you with open arms.
Well, that's a lovely thought to end on. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and passion for Cobb with us.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Cobh, Ireland. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and maybe even feel inspired to plan your own adventure. Remember, every corner of the world has a story to tell, so go out there, explore, and discover those stories for yourself. And